NewsX World. Let's take a look at some of the top stories. Donald Trump's special envoy Steve Witkoff is meeting Russian President Vladimir Putin in Moscow as President Trump's deadline for a Russia-Ukraine ceasefire approaches. Trump has warned of heavy sanctions if Russia fails to end the war, while Ukraine's Zelensky welcomes the threat of tougher US sanctions. Russia attacks a gas facility in Ukraine's Odessa region, targeting the infrastructure preparations for the winter season, President Zelensky says. He describes the attack as a deliberate blow to Ukraine's winter preparations, while urging Washington to pressure Russia for a ceasefire. At least 20 Palestinians are killed and many others are injured when a truck carrying humanitarian aid overturned onto a crowd in central Gaza. The incident happened as people gathered in search of food and supplies amid a growing humanitarian crisis. A top UN official has warned of catastrophic consequences if Israel expands its military operations in Gaza. This comes amid reports that Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is pushing for a total reoccupation of the Strip. Japan commemorated the 80th anniversary of the atomic bombing of Hiroshima with a silent prayer and ceremony, reminding the world of the horrors unleashed. The prayer took place at 8:15 a.m., the exact moment when a little boy was dropped over the city on August the 6th of 1945. Heavy rains and landslides hammered rescue efforts in India's Uttarakhand state after flooding killed 4 and left dozens missing. Army and disaster force teams struggled to reach the cut-off village of Daroli as major highways remained blocked. Carol Nawrocki, a nationalist historian and supporter of US President Donald Trump, was sworn in as Poland's new president after winning the June 1st election. His victory deals a significant blow to pro-EU government. The US Department of Health and Human Services plans to cancel $500 million in funding for vaccines being developed to combat diseases like flu and COVID-19. The decision affects 22 projects led by companies such as Pfizer and Moderna, with Health Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr. justifying it on claims of risks over benefits. We start off with our top story this hour, where the impact of Trump's trade and tariff policies has been widespread, affecting nations across economic spectrums. For China, although President Donald Trump has stated that the US is close to a trade deal, there has been a constant push on Beijing to stop purchasing oil from Iran and from Russia. China has rejected the push and stated that the country would always ensure that its energy supply in ways that serve its national interests. This comes as China faces an August the 12th deadline to finalize a tariff agreement with the United States following preliminary deals in May and June to end escalating tariffs and rare earth mineral disputes. Moving on, bilateral tensions between Washington and Rio de Janeiro have recently escalated after the US imposed a 50% tariff on Brazil. Brazilian President Lula has rejected Trump's offer to discuss tariffs, instead stating that Brazil will use all available resources, including the World Trade Organization, to defend its interests. According to a ministry statement, China's foreign minister has said that China supports Brazil in safeguarding its own rights. Moreover, the minister has also stated that China opposes what it calls bullying behavior of imposing excessive tariffs, and that it is against, quote, unreasonable external interference in Brazil's internal affairs, end quote. We're now joined by Zheng Junfeng, who's a CGTN anchor. He joins us live from the Chinese capital of Beijing. Thank you very much, Zheng, for joining us here on NewsX. Well, pleasure to have you.
Pleasure.
China has pushed back at US demands to stop buying Russian and Iranian oil. How does Beijing view US pressure to reduce oil imports from Russia and from Iran, particularly in the light of international sanctions?
Well, Thomas, like you, I'm also a business news presenter. I read news on daily basis about this, exchanges of information. I've learned that China constantly adheres to an independent foreign policy, and we're very serious about our sovereignty, just like India is. And China makes energy trade decisions based on its national interests and also international principles, just like any major economy does. India has said so many times, and also the United States has said so many times. So it's very easy to understand. China respects the legitimate energy needs of all countries. China has its own energy needs. So that's why China naturally opposes unilateral sanctions that lack the basis of international law. We find it absurd that some countries use their domestic law to sanction other countries. China's trade with Russia and Iran in energy is normal. Economic cooperation has been going on for many years, and that should not be interfered by any third parties, including the United States. China has always been advocating for resolving disputes through dialogue and consultation, and China upholds the stability of global energy markets and the legitimate rights of doing normal trade of all nations. Remember, Thomas, China is a manufacturing powerhouse. It manufactures goods not just for its own markets, not just for its own people, but also for global buyers, including India, like your country, including the United States. People in the US will find their products in Walmart, in grocery stores, in any kinds of daily necessities or unities. Those prices would rise if China's energy trade is interfered or interrupted, because if China manufactures products with higher energy prices, it will transcend to the end products, and much of that end products can be used in global markets, such as in the United States. So interfering with China's normal energy trade does not serve the best interest of the end users, including US consumers. So US policymakers really need to think it through when they make such decisions.
Yes,
Thomas.
Thank you for your insights, Zheng. With tensions over energy policy and technology, how does China see the path forward for stable and mutually beneficial trade relations with the United States, especially with Donald Trump at the helm?
Right. Like you, Thomas, I'm a newsreader. From our daily news headlines I read every day, China views stable and mutual beneficial trade relations with the United States and with many other major economies, such as India, as crucial for global economic stability, for global economic goods, and for the benefits of global people. Despite rising tensions since Donald Trump took office, China remains committed to dialogue and cooperation and exchanges with the US. China opposes decoupling or discriminatory policies. China believes that China and the US should address differences through equal consultation. We should strengthen policy coordination on macroeconomy, and we foster an open and inclusive and non-discriminative trade environment. China's always been upholding those policies since China was admitted into the World Trade Organization since 2002. I remember I was a student back in university at that moment. My major was in international trade, and we even had a celebration of that. So China took WTO rules very seriously. So China supports multilateralism and WTO-based global trade system, which benefits all member countries, including China, India, and the United States. That's why China has been upholding 3 rounds of trade talks, trade negotiations, or meetings, whatever name you use it, to describe those meetings in, if you remember, in May in Geneva, in neutral nation, and then in London in June, because London was, Britain was the first country that strike a trade deal with the United States. Then in London in June, then recently in July in Stockholm. We haven't heard any how can I say, tangible results coming out of Stockholm. I believe two sides are still in very tense negotiations. You just read in your news headlines some dates in August. I'm not fully aware of the dates or the so-called headlines in trade negotiations. We're anxiously waiting for a tangible or a fixed trade number to come out. It could be a whole package because the situation between China and US trade cooperation is very complex, involves many aspects. It's a multi-billion-dollar trade cooperation. So we expect the trade pact or the negotiation result would be not easy, would be quite complex. It would be a package of a lot of issues, a lot of policies, not just one or two numbers.
Yes, and finally, Zheng, Beijing has voiced its opinion on this issue as well, that President Lula, the president of Brazil, has announced that Rio de Janeiro will respond to the US tariffs with a contingency plan. How does China view this development, and what implications might it have for broader BRICS trade cooperation?
Yes, talking about BRICS, Brazil is a very important nation in the BRICS member. And I remember recently Chinese Premier Li Qiang attended the BRICS summit in Brazil. I myself, with some of my Xi Jinping colleagues, were going there. But for myself, I didn't have the luck. But some of my colleagues went there with Premier Li Qiang. And when President Lula visited China recently, my colleague Wang Guan had an opportunity to talk to Lula, one-on-one interview. So there were many exchanges between China and Brazil as two important members of BRICS nations. China respects Brazil's sovereign right to respond to trade measures in line with its national interests, just as China respects India's sovereign right to respond to its trade measures in line with your national interest. As a key BRICS member, Brazil's stance highlights the importance of solidarity among the global south, among emerging economies, in safeguarding their own interests, in safeguarding fair trade, in safeguarding their solidarity. China supports BRICS nations enhancing cooperation, resisting trade protectionism, and promoting a more just, equal global economic order. This development underscores the need for collaboration between BRICS countries. Now we do not just have 5 countries in the characters of BRICS. We have now 10 countries now, including members from Africa, from the Middle East, and more global South countries. So it's important for us to strengthen our collaboration in trade, in finance, in industrial chains. We talk about supply chain a lot. Recently, I attended and actually hosted one of the sessions in the China supply chain, just somewhere not far from us. Really pays a lot of attention to supply chain nowadays. That is to foster some collective resilience against the rising unilateralism we see mostly from Western nations. So China remains a firm advocate for multilateralism and win-win cooperation between BRICS countries, not just the 10 BRICS countries, but also global South, but also emerging economies.
Zheng Junfeng, thank you very much for your insight and joining us here on NewsX World. Pleasure to have you on the programme. We now move over to Europe for our next story, where US envoy Steve Witkoff has met with Russian President Vladimir Putin in Moscow today, just 2 days before the deadline set by US President Donald Trump for Russia to make progress towards peace in Ukraine. Trump has warned Russia of fresh sanctions if it fails to halt its offensive. The talks come after 3 rounds of failed peace negotiations. Meanwhile, Trump has threatened secondary tariffs on Russia's trading partners like China and India. We're now joined by Professor Veselin Popovsky, who's a professor and Vice Dean at Jindal Global Law School, to discuss this further. Thank you very much, as always, Professor Popovsky, for joining us here on the programme. I want to get your analysis about how Steve Witkoff and the Russian president's relationship, and negotiations might go this time. Obviously, the stance towards the Russian president from Steve Witkoff's boss has changed since they last met. How do you think that this creeping sanctions deadline is going to affect the personal relationship between Witkoff and Putin in this round of negotiations?
Let's see. It will be known in the next few hours. You are right, Thomas, that the stand of Donald Trump has changed. It is very more robust. It is much more demanding to Putin to agree on a ceasefire, unconditional, as made before many times. Russia always rejected the ceasefire so far. So let's hope this time they will accept. There are some rumors that they can accept the air ceasefire to stop bombing, which will be a good news if it happens. Again, I'm skeptical, but if that happens, depending on how long that will last, maybe Putin will come with something before the deadline saying that he will, well, he did it over Easter, over the 9th of May, the Second World War celebration day. He may say 24-hour ceasefire somehow to at least satisfy the deadline, but that won't bring much peace in Ukraine. So I'm skeptical about Witkoff. He hasn't been there for a long time. He used to go very regularly to Moscow, and only now, in a kind of a last-minute attempt to make some progress, he's there. Let's see. It's very interesting what will happen, but again, I'm skeptical anything can. Unless Russia agree on a long-term ceasefire, everything else will be a manipulation, will be another maneuver from Kremlin to delay and to continue the war.
Professor Popovsky, we've seen past examples of this, and a temporary peace and a long-term peace seemed way out of reach in regards to these talks. So if things go how they did previously, then it's more than likely then sanctions will be imposed. How do you think the Kremlin are feeling about the possibility of them further being isolated economically from the rest of the world, particularly with these over 100% tariffs on the likes of India and China, who continue to trade with Russia? Just briefly, how effective do you think these sanctions are going to be by putting pressure on Vladimir Putin?
I think if the sanctions are applied by India and by China and by other major importers of Russian oil and gas, they will hit heavily Vladimir Putin and the Russian economy. The problem so far has been that Russia continued to sell oil and gas almost in the quantities they did before the war, but this time not to Europe, but rather to India and China and some other importers. So if sanctions hit Russia, and these are global sanctions, if all the countries in the world apply sanctions, but also the secondary sanctions are important. If some countries continue to buy oil and gas, and the United States and other countries impose secondary sanctions, in other words, sanctions on country continuing buying Russian oil and gas, that will also have an effect. So let's hope this time US administration is serious and not delaying and maneuvering again. If that happens, obviously Russia has no other income apart from selling oil and gas. They don't produce anything else apart from natural resources. So if that is significantly cut from exporting from Russia, that will have a major effect, I must say.
Yes, Dr. Popovsky, please stay with us as we discuss this further. We have more information for the audience. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has urged the United States to ramp up pressure on Russia to end its war during a visit to Moscow by US envoy Steve Witkoff. Zelensky said it was important to strengthen all levers in the arsenal of the US, Europe and the G7 to ensure a ceasefire takes effect immediately. He said that Ukraine sees the political will and appreciates the efforts of its partners, including America and everyone who is helping. We're once again joined by Professor Popovsky. What do you think of Zelensky's statement there? He's seemingly very much in desperation to have a ceasefire called. This obviously draws contrast with Vladimir Putin, who gives vague statements, says he wants a ceasefire, but actions prove otherwise, as we'll talk about later. What are your thoughts on the current position of the Ukrainian president and the way his government and delegations are going around negotiating peace here?
Yes, the position of Ukraine is always consistent. It is solid. They have repeatedly accepted a ceasefire, any ceasefire, even 30 days ceasefire on any ground, air, land, sea. And Ukraine continues its constructive approach, increasingly encouraging such negotiations, telling United States also to put pressure on Russia, otherwise we see no progress if Russia is not under pressure. I wonder whether Zelensky may do something quite interesting hours before the deadline expires on Friday to announce himself on the Ukrainian side to stop fire. In fact, somehow to say, yes, we agree with Donald Trump's deadline, and we are happy at 12 o'clock US time to cease fire, kind of even unilaterally, and to invite Vladimir Putin to do the same. And if Putin doesn't do the same, obviously, Zelensky complies once again with the demand of the US administration for a ceasefire, but if Russia doesn't, then sanctions should follow.
Yes, indeed. We now have some information about what's going on the ground. Russian strikes have killed 2 people and wounded 10 others, including 4 children in Ukraine's Zaporizhzhia region, Governor Ivan Fedorov has said today. Zaporizhzhia region Governor Ivan Fedorov said that Russian forces carried out 567 attacks across 16 settlements in the region over a 24-hour period into Wednesday morning. He also added that at least 9 buildings were damaged early in strikes on the city district. Fedorov also said that emergency services continue to respond on the ground, but Russia has not yet commented on these strikes. While, according to the Russian Defense Ministry, Russian forces have hit Ukraine's gas transportation system supplying military facilities. We're once again joined by Professor Popovsky. We have some updates there about what's going on in the ground. A Russian strike that's killed 2 and also further strikes on energy infrastructure. What are your thoughts about what's going on the ground currently, especially with these peace talks supposedly going on?
Yes, people don't do such things. If you have Witkoff in Moscow, if you have a deadline, if you need to negotiate the ceasefire, you don't continue killing mostly civilian objects. That's what Russia does all the time. They really don't care. They can kill civilians as much. I have the feeling this is what the good news for Putin every morning is. When he wakes up and there is a report that some other civilians are killed in Ukraine, that's what makes his day cheerful and happy. So once again, it's not a negotiation party. Kremlin apparently does one thing, killing civilians, but talking another thing, that they would like to cooperate and they would like to achieve peace in Ukraine. And the two are absolutely opposites. They don't match at all. Again and again, Russia continues to demonstrate its unwillingness to agree on a ceasefire, but also, interestingly, those information are quite minimal. Those advances are not military advances. Russia did nothing significant on the military front in the battlefield. We see reports only of hitting civilian objects and killing few people here, few people there. That's not a war in the classical sense. For the last 12 months, for the last year, Russia advances are calculated at 5,000 square kilometers. But if we think of a front line which is 1,000 kilometers, that makes only 5 kilometers annually advances. That's absolutely minimal, insignificant. So all the talks about some major Russian military advances on the battlefield are wrong. Russia does not achieve anything in Donetsk and anywhere else over the last 12 months, losing its soldiers, by the way, on a daily basis. So militarily, Russia is losing the war, which means at some point they have to realize that, and that's probably the road to peace if Russia recognizes it has nothing in the last 12 months significant military achievement.
Professor Popovsky, obviously journalists and press aren't allowed onto the front line in eastern Ukraine. How much do we know, just briefly, about what's going on there? You gave us a brief mention of it there, but how much more do we know about what's going on that front line in the east of Ukraine?
Again, as I said, nothing more. If we look even in the Russian reports, they are saying many times they captured Chasiv Yar. At least 20 times they were reporting that they finally captured Chasiv Yar. And that village is still in Ukrainian hands. Later, we find the truth when we see the reports by serious war institutes and satellite images that Russia is not advancing much. They are talking about Pokrovsk for many, many months. And Pokrovsk, major hub in eastern Donetsk, is still in the hands of Ukrainians. So I don't really trust what Russian military correspondents say. They are trying to please Putin. They are trying to say to Putin there are advances. But if we look over time, as I said, 12 months, the advances are very minimal.
Yes.
It's really the territory of Delhi to Sonipat where I am now. It's really minimal. It's nothing, virtually.
Professor Popovsky, thank you very much, as always, for joining us on that topic. And it is a topic we will continue to bring to you with all the updates in regards to the Ukraine and Russia conflict. We now move over to Europe once again, where Poland's new Conservative president, Karol Nawrocki, was sworn in today following his victory in June's presidential election. The inauguration ceremony was held in front of the Polish parliament as he officially succeeded outgoing President Duda, who had served as president since 2015. Nawrocki, a 42-year-old conservative historian, won the runoff with 50.9% of the vote, defeating Warsaw Mayor Rafał Tarkowski. His presidency is expected to mark a shift in Poland's domestic and foreign policies, with a focus on national priorities, stronger ties to the Trump administration, and a skeptical approach to the European Union. Nawrocki's win will also signal a broader right-wing nationalist trend across Europe. We're now joined by Asuma Katauka. She is an anchor and she joins us to give us a bit more context. Asuma, what more can you tell us about this situation in Poland?
Yes, today President Karol Nawrocki, he's a conservative candidate, has now been inaugurated as a prime president in Poland. And we have to, like you have said, that he is a right-wing conservative candidate who has had no prior politician experience prior to being joined as this candidate. So this kind of reflects the shift in today's Europe too, which is now gaining right-wing is gaining popularity as well as momentum in Europe, as well as Poland. He has been welcomed in the parliament with a lot of chant with his name, calling Karol, Karol, and lots of clapping. He has mentioned that he's going to support NATO, and he said that in his inauguration speech that Poland is going to be going to lead in Eastern European forces / in NATO's forces. He has shown support for Ukraine's war in Russia, and he has said that he will be supporting Ukraine's war in Russia with this. And something to note down that he is not, as although people have this image of him being a historian, him being he has been in a lot of controversy and a lot of scandals as well before. So there has been something related to his apartment that was funded by, and also people speculate there's more controversy relating to him coming to power out of nowhere, related to his job as a security guard earlier in his life, and people speculate that maybe he met someone there. So it's a lot of things are unclear, but one thing for sure is that Poland is shifted now with having a right-wing president and a more centrist prime minister. So it will be interesting to see how Poland will be moving forward as a country.
Yes, Asuma, thank you very much for joining us and giving us a bit more context behind that situation.